Hi, Diefesters. My name is Rudinov Vincent, and I am the founder of Diefest Global. A warm welcome to you all on the third edition. This year, Diefest will focus on the future of work by addressing authenticity, belongingness, and social impact as some of the most important practices for building a more inclusive and purpose driven workforce for everyone to thrive. Before we begin, I would like to humbly thank our belonging partner, Newsilla, for supporting our initiative in democratizing world class content and promoting equity in education. On this note, I would like to welcome you to our session on how racial microaggressions impact mental health. Our moderator for today is the Managing Director of Employer Services for National Organization on Disability. She brings over 20 years of experience making the connection for businesses to the untapped talent pool of people with disabilities. More importantly, she has experienced the value of disability inclusion in her own business and through her work in the staffing industry, created talent acquisition programs dedicated to mitigating talent gaps while increasing integrated competitive employment opportunities for people with disabilities. Please welcome Felicia Nurmsen.
Thank you so much, Rudolph. I appreciate that introduction. It really is my pleasure to be here today, and my pleasure to be here with Dr. Torino. I'm going to go ahead and do a brief introduction for her as well. And Dr. Torino received her doctorate in counseling psychology from Columbia University in 2009. She has authored numerous scholarly articles, book chapters, and peer-reviewed publications on the teaching strategies used to cultivate culturally competent clinicians, processes of white racial identity development, and the manifestation and impact of microaggressions. Her co-edited book, Microaggression Theory, Influence and Implications, presents cutting-edge reviews of microaggression research, explores controversies surrounding the theory, discusses its relationship to the sociopolitical dynamics of society, and offers solutions in combating microaggressions at the individual, institutional, and societal levels. She has conducted numerous diversity training workshops within the fields of higher education, nursing, mental health, medicine, emergency management, business, and K through 12 education. Dr. Torino currently serves as interim dean of the School of Social and Behavioral Sciences at SUNY Empire State College. Moreover, she is a board member of the RAND Corporation Center to Advance Racial Equality and Equity Policy. Finally, she is a licensed psychologist and has a private practice in Westchester County, New York. For more information, you can visit her website at ginatorino.com. So thank you so much, Gina, for being here with us today. I'm excited to have this discussion.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here.
We have a lot to cover during our time together. So first, would you provide a bit of background on the history of the term microaggressions and how they manifest in the workplace?
Sure. Well, thank you again. I'm so grateful to be here and to be able to talk about microaggressions. I've been doing this work now for, I don't know, quite some time, almost 20 years. I might date myself, but the term microaggressions was initially coined by Dr. Chester Pierce. He was an African-American psychiatrist from Harvard, and he did some of the earliest work looking at African Americans' depictions in television commercials. So that was kind of his first area of research. And he initially coined that term in the 70s. But since then, not a lot of work had been done on it until the late 90s and early 2000s. Solorzano and colleagues did some work in microaggressions in higher education. And, essentially the whole kind of background of microaggressions is at least in the United States, and I know elsewhere in the world, racism exists, sexism exists, and it used to be more overt. But in the United States, since the civil rights movement, we've seen kind of bias kind of go a little bit more underground, so to speak, not as overt. But more recently, as we've seen in the United States, at least, some of the some implicit bias come out in our culture, with respect to George Floyd and police shootings. So the notion of bias never went away. It's not that, because of what happened in the civil rights movement, people stopped being racist, for example. It just kind of manifested a bit differently. So my research team in graduate school at Columbia University, we were doing some work and published a paper in 2007 called Racial Microaggressions in Everyday Life, Implications for Clinical Practice. And in that piece, what we did is we looked at the literature and created themes of different types of microaggressions that we found existed. And really what microaggressions are, they are derogatory slights or insults directed towards a target person or group. And typically that person has marginalized identities, whether that's with respect to race, gender, ability, sexual identity, and social class, and so on. And microaggressions can be delivered in a host of ways, either behaviorally, verbally, environmentally. Oftentimes they are unconscious, but not always. And they're not just mistakes. They come from our own implicit biases. And we all have biases, whether we like it or not. And these biases are often rooted in stereotypes we have about different people. So, the examples of the microaggressions are, you can look in the literature, there's so many of them. So something more subtle, like telling for example, if I was at work and I told a Black colleague, oh, you're so articulate. So what am I saying there? I'm saying I'm intending, right, to maybe give somebody a compliment. However, what the message is that, oh, I'm surprised that somebody from your racial group is smart. Another type of microaggression, overlooking somebody at a meeting, not listening to them, right? So that's a very subtle kind of thing. So if there's a woman who's talking, I just don't listen to her, or I may actually take her idea, at a meeting during work. So that would be an example of a microaggression. Again, it's not so overt. It's much more subtle. And there's so many, examples that I can give, saying someone, oh, can I touch your hair? That, like, okay, maybe you're intending to say, okay, I really like it, but you're exoticizing that person. Or maybe asking an Asian colleague, say, oh, could you help me with this math problem? And not because that that person has a skill in math, it's maybe because they're Asian and the assumption is that they're good at math. So those are just some examples of some of the microaggressions that can manifest in the workplace and actually abound quite a bit. Again, we may not even be aware that we are committing these microaggressions because they're so subtle. And because the person may not say anything, we don't maybe even understand, what we're doing. So I think really the goal here is to raise awareness of our own biases. And there's lots of different ways to do that. And I can talk about that a little bit later if you want as well.
So that would be fantastic. I know the one thing that we do want to talk about, I would love to hear more about that as well. But what could you talk just a little bit about the cumulative effect, right? That all of these microaggressions that, but as you said, you may not be aware of them as it's happening, but how does it relate to mental health, physical health, and then workplace behaviors?
Yeah, the cumulative and insidious impact of microaggressions are great. They're often described as death by 1,000 cuts. So it may seem, innocuous. Well, okay, so what if someone, says that I'm articulate? It's the daily, everyday kind of thing we're talking about here. It's not like it's not a one-time thing. It happens all the time. And so that can really drain a person. It really saps somebody's energy having to explain to people like this isn't okay, or you might not want to do that. It's a lot of work while the person has work to do. So they're kind of fending off these microaggressions while they have some work to do. Another thing that is really can be draining to people is the ambiguity of some microaggressions. Like I talked about, sometimes people would be ignored during a meeting or overlooked. How do you know that's based on race or gender or sexual identity? You don't really know, but you notice it happens to you a lot. And you talk about it with your colleagues, maybe from the same group, and they're like, yeah, that happens to me too. So you're thinking, well, maybe it is, but I don't know. And that kind of ambiguity leaves people feeling like, am I crazy here or what? They're not, but it can leave somebody feeling that way because they're not validated by maybe their manager or somebody else at work. And we don't want to create a culture within our work environments that microaggressions are okay or they're normal or expected, because that can reinforce inequities. Really, the cumulative impact of microaggressions can really serve as a threat to one's identity within an organization. And the literature that's been emerging, I would say over the last like maybe 10 years or so, is really pointing to the connection and correlation between the incidence of perceived microaggressions and things like depression, anxiety, something that's newer to the literature called race-based traumatic stress, which is really analogous to something like a PTSD, where somebody can be experiencing like a hypervigilance and really concern, and especially if they've experienced microaggressions at work. And I actually had an opportunity to work on a case where this actually happened to somebody. I was an expert witness on a case, and this person experienced microaggressions, and the person was eventually fired, but then they came back to the site once in a while, and she had experienced something like a PTSD from seeing this person there. So that can really happen to people. Also, things like, suicidal ideation too. That's really unfortunate, and really, microaggressions really lead to cultural mistrust. Like if you are committing microaggressions pretty regularly in the workplace, how can I really trust you? And if I can't trust a colleague or a coworker, how am I going to be productive, right? How am I going to actually do the work that I need to do and produce? So that's a real problem as well. But in addition to some of the psychological impacts, there are also physical impacts. We're finding that microaggressions correlate with poor physical morbidity, increased alcohol use, increased cortisol level, which is like the stress hormone, reduced medication compliance, and things of that nature. And with respect to the workplace, I mean, what we're finding too is that people who experience microaggressions on a pretty daily basis report like decreases in job satisfaction, lower organizational commitment, negative impact on job performance, and higher rates of attrition. So if, people may think, well, okay, well, again, like, what does it really matter if these microaggressions are happening? Well, it does matter because in the workplace, if you're looking at these issues that are happening, people are leaving the organization, you're really not, your money is not going very far because, in organizations, as we know, we spend money on training, we spend money on hiring, we spend a lot of money and resources. And if we're not retaining talent, diverse talent, it's going to affect the bottom line. So I do think that this work, obviously from my perspective, from a humanitarian perspective, it's important. And from a business perspective, it is important. So that's really what we're looking at here with respect to the cumulative impact of microaggressions.
It's just amazing when you think about all of the things that we really do need to consider in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we help organizations, right? What kind of interventions can organizations and individuals maybe practice or provide in order to mitigate some of these effects? Obviously, we want to do everything that we possibly can, but thinking about all of the other issues, microaggressions really are part of those issues, but we're kind of separating them out, but it's part of the whole cultural experience for our employees.
That's correct. And, one of the things, that I would recommend, with respect to organizations, well, one, it's my hope that all organizations would have in some capacity, I mean, depending on how large they are, would have some DEI and leadership and positions, upper management, administration, whatever type of organization you're in, there would be somebody there to kind of oversee this work within an organization. And then two, to understand microaggressions within an organization, you have to have an assessment. There is this one company, actually, they're based in the UK, called Inchorus. They have a software program that people could, use like on a subscription basis, and they will actually do an assessment of the types of microaggressions, the frequency, so it's a really good organization. So that's another thing. I mean, if you use that, or you even create your own survey, obviously anonymous, because people may not want to, talk about them, or, disclose, have them be identified with a particular person. So it's important to maintain that anonymity if you're trying to get an understanding. So you have to understand what's going on. Another piece I think organizations could really, take to heart is when you're onboarding new employees, you can include some implicit bias and microaggression training. That's a good opportunity to say, hey, as you begin this work here, we want you to understand what implicit bias is. We want you to understand your own biases. We want to help you understand what microaggressions are and how they could potentially manifest in the workplace, and to kind of give some kind of talk, like similar to what I'm doing now, maybe in more depth and more detail, obviously, but that would be excellent. Also, training hiring committees and management to understand and prevent implicit bias in hiring and promotion. So not only, do we do it with the new employees, but when we're hiring people, there can be bias through the hiring practice or promotion. How are we promoting people within this organization? Making cultural competency maybe part of one of the competencies that every employee would have to demonstrate that they're adept at in order to progress in an organization. Bringing in guest speakers to discuss topics related to implicit bias and microaggressions are important. Implementing employee resource groups, so groups that are kind of formed within the organization that provide some training, that provide resources, provide readings, provide support for people within an organization. Those are really important as well. I think that, with respect to microaggressions as they occur in an organization, because I think it's important too to understand, like, okay, well, what if I'm in an organization and I do commit a microaggression? Like, what do I say? Because we all make mistakes. We're human beings, and it's not avoiding the mistakes that is the issue. It's how do you respond to somebody who may confront you on something, right? So if I commit a microaggression, to somebody, they might be like, I'd be like, oh, well, can you help me with this math problem? They say, well, not all Asians are good at math, and that. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that offensive? Yes, it was. Oh, okay. I'm very sorry. I wasn't aware. Thank you for telling me that. So it's important to acknowledge that you did make a mistake. Don't get defensive, because if you get defensive, that's just going to break down trust and communication with that person, the fellow employee. And take responsibility for yourself, for learning more and more about yourself, so that you can prevent these microaggressions from happening. Will we as human beings be able to excise all of our bias? No, but we can work on it. We can become better. We can always strive to become better, and that's what I think is most important. And some people say, well, I'm afraid to open my mouth now. Oh, I just heard you talk, and now I don't want to say anything. No, that's not the point. The point is to say things and then be open to what you might hear back from that person. So not to shut down. And I don't, don't want people to get shut down, because, when we talk about bias, particularly, with respect to racism, can feel like, oh, I'm afraid. It's not the fear, it's the overcoming that and being able to step out and make mistakes. We're all human beings, and that's true. So I want to make sure that I convey that here today with you.
Absolutely. And everything that you just said are things that we are talking about at the National Organization on Disability as it relates to people with disabilities as well, right? So ensuring about your implicit bias, right?
Yes.
Making sure that we are looking at people with disabilities as far as the entire employee life cycle is concerned, right?
Yes.
Because retention starts at the application process. And that's right. Just what you're saying. Make sure that this education is happening during the onboarding process, and that we continue to provide that professional development for our existing employees to ensure that we continue to either mitigate that, as well as ensure that we're creating opportunities for people.
That's correct. That's right. That's really important. Sure. Yep.
Now, one last, I know we actually have 10 minutes left. So I really would love for you to talk about prevention,
Mhm.
right? What can we do potentially to prevent this moving forward? We've talked a little bit about what's currently happening, but thinking about really what can we put in place as that foundation in order to prevent it in the future?
Yeah, I think, in order to prevent microaggressions, I really think that what's so important is for people and organizations to make this commitment to become you can feel them anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-ableist. Like we have to make it that commitment. And then once that commitment is made, it really does take work. So when I say work, I mean, it takes this kind of inner work to develop a certain level of self-awareness, and it does require being a little uncomfortable in order to learn. I think all learning happens and growth happens through some discomfort. So it's really taking on opportunities. There are organizations that provide anti-racist workshops, and I could list a bunch of different ones, but the Center for White American Culture. There's, to understand one's own biases, I think will help prevent the incidence of microaggressions. But I think it really requires somebody saying to themselves, like, yes, I'm going to make this commitment to do this work. I'm going to seek out opportunities. Another one, online training that somebody could do is the implicit association test. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's out of Harvard, and anybody could take that online. You can do it from your home, and it really kind of gives you a sense of, and then again, there's some controversy about the research, but I think overall it's a good kind of starting place for people to kind of say, okay, what are some of my biases? I may think I'm not biased, but maybe I am. And so really just developing that, I think, self-awareness of your own biases can help you then prevent them from manifesting in the workplace, with your friends and your family, and as a person in general, because we have a lot of context that we live in. We're not just at work, but so I really think developing that self-awareness is key. And if there aren't opportunities for you to develop that in your workplace, it's really incumbent on people to do that on their own. Doing some reading, maybe just to start off doing some reading. There's a good book called A Blind Spot by Banaji. There's White Fragility. That's another good book. Becoming Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. Again, my specialty is race, so I do have a lot of those books like on the top of my head. My colleague wrote a book called "That's So Gay," and that's out through the American Psychological Association. So even just doing some reading, that'll just kind of get you into the frame to say, okay, wow, I didn't realize that these could be microaggressions, and maybe I've said this to somebody, or just asking somebody, how's your wife? Well, I'm gay and I have a husband. Like, okay, well, okay. So sorry. Like, like just even little subtle things like that. Like, okay, yeah, that heteronormative. Okay. I got that. Like, it's just, important to just even start some reading. So reading, developing self-awareness, going to workshops, doing that training, I think, and getting out into the world, sometimes we learn by doing. So when we're out there, and again, if we do receive some feedback, listen to that feedback, and then that will prevent you from doing it again in the future. We're always learning and growing as human beings. So I want to say that too.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. But what do you say to the detractors, right? To those people and those organizations that will say, well, if our people aren't recognizing them as microaggressions, then why do we have to do anything about it? Why would we do any work on this?
Well, they may not be saying it because maybe, and some people are reluctant to speak up because of fear, fear of how this will impact their performance, and, will it impact their ability to get a raise or to progress in an organization. So, they may be saying they're not experiencing it, but maybe they are. And so you don't really know. And sometimes, microaggressions can occur out of a person's awareness. And so maybe they're not impacting them, but oftentimes people are aware of them. And again, whether or not they say it, that's another piece. And I think, there has to be some judgment and sensitivity, I think, given towards people and their real experiences. I work, as in my capacity as dean. I'm on a climate committee at the university where I am, and people have reported in the organization, anonymously, all these microaggressions. And you would go to work, you would say, what microaggressions? Oh, not me. But they're there. They just, you may not hear about them. So that's why it's really important to understand your organization, and either on your own with a consultation or through an organization, to really develop some system of understanding what is going on in your organization. Because I can guarantee everyone who's listening in every organization that people belong to, they're happening and they are having an impact. You're just not aware of it. It's because people fear talking about bias. And I think what's really important for people to understand is that working through that fear and just talking, being explicit about what's going on is so key, because they're there. And so you're just ignoring a problem. It's like, what is that phrase? Elephant in the room or something? Like
Let's introduce the elephant in the room.
Yeah. Like, it's happening. It's in the room, but you're not talking about it. It's just going to get bigger and bigger. And, like you said before, like these microaggressions are happening and they're impacting people. Like somebody leaves your organization, you don't know why they're leaving. They may not even say it in their exit interview, but that's what's happened to them, unfortunately. And then you don't get feedback from people. So it's really important. And it has to be like a proactive kind of approach, I think. If any leadership here is listening, and any guidance I could give is just to really be proactive and say, hey, we want to get a better understanding of what's going on here. So help us understand. Have you ever had these experiences? If so, tell us about it. How frequently? How has it impacted you? We want to help. We want to help, ameliorate these as much as possible. Like I said, it may not happen overnight, and you may not completely eradicate them, but you can do your best to work on, minimizing their impact in the workplace.
Absolutely. Well, I want to see if there are any questions. I think that Sean is with us to see if we have any audience questions.
No audience questions so far. It's okay.
Okay. All right. Wow.
That's okay.
That means that you're doing a great job.
Yes, I don't know. I'm not sure what it means. Okay, that's fine. We're okay with that.
Absolutely.
But I really appreciate this time and this opportunity, because there has been a backlash, I think, against microaggressions, and saying, oh, you're making a big deal out of nothing. It's really, get over it. I've heard that before. People say that. And well, okay, get over it. But what about all this research that's come out that says, people are really impacted in a negative way? Like, who wants to be depressed and, because of this, or feel like they want to kill themselves? I mean, these are serious issues that are happening here. So I think that people who say those things, I don't think they understand the literature. They don't understand what the research has been saying and how important it is, because we know as people within organizations, and if you do any kind of management, that emotions are important and people's feelings are important, and attending to those within an organization is the key to being productive. And, if people feel satisfied, if they feel like they can trust people, they're going to feel more secure in their job, and they're just going to be more productive. So it really does impact the bottom line. And, it's just such an important topic. So I really appreciate being invited here, and be happy to answer questions. Or if anyone wants to follow up with me, please feel free to reach out to me through my website. I'm happy to help in whatever way that I can.
Well, I know that as I said, I was so happy to be a part of this session. I did expressly request this because it is something that I think it's so important, Dr. Torino, and the work that you're doing. I know that you are doing a lot of training. I certainly would hope to see more of that, and especially as it relates to mental health in the workplace. Sure. We know that is such a huge issue right now, and it continues to grow. So would love to see that. And I don't think that I think microaggressions might have a little bit to do with the Great Resignation, with quiet quitting, all of those things. When we're dissatisfied, and how is that has that
Oh, yeah.
happened, right? What has affected people?
And you're right. There was a recent article in the New York Times, I think, talked about how people of color who were working at home felt much better working at home because they didn't have to deal with the in-person microaggressions and, or being excluded from events or, being touched or, like they felt like, oh, even though they did experience some microaggressions online, it was a lot less than, and now some of the anxiety about going back into the workplace. There's articles out there. People can read them. They're there. So it is a big issue. So thank you so much for saying.
Thank you. This was fantastic. The time flew by.
Yes.
So great to be here with you. Really,
Yes.
again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.